Okay. Guys, welcome to the I Love CVille Show. It's Jerry Miller. It's good to be with you on a Tuesday. Thank you kindly for joining us. A lot we're going to cover here on the program with a Charlottesville planning commissioner that I'm very excited to introduce you to. This gentleman, a sharp individual that's without question entrusted with the future of the city of Charlottesville and a lot of Central Virginia. Rory Stolzenberg will join us in a matter of moments on the I Love CVille Show. Take a look at the questions we have on our Facebook page. We've syndicated them to LinkedIn, to Twitter, and to Instagram as well. If you'd like to participate with the discussion, please join us by posting a question in the chat box. Before we go any further, let's thank Greenberry's Coffee and Sean and Roxanne Simmons. I want to put their entrepreneurial journey into perspective for you. About 30 years ago, a husband and wife tandem moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, where they had a dream of creating a coffee shop. Sean Simmons apprenticed under Pete's Coffee, took that knowledge to Charlottesville, used a two-door beat-up Honda Civic and the McIntyre Office Park as a roasting facility and the Honda Civic as transportation. Roxanne delivered the coffee around town while Sean roasted the coffee. They opened a location in Barracks Road Shopping Center. Almost 30 years later, they're in Japan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, soon to open in Portland, Washington, D.C., and it started here in Charlottesville. We also thank Scott Wagner of Scott Wagner Chiropractic and Sports Medicine. Who's got your back? Scott Wagner of Scott Wagner Chiropractic and Sports Medicine most certainly has your back. I see him changing lives on a regular basis. I am very excited for this program. I appreciate folks that are willing to come on and talk about why they love Charlottesville, their expertise, and what they're doing to make Charlottesville better. Judah Wickhauer, on that note, let's go to the two-shot. Let's welcome Rory to the program. First, Rory, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me here, Jerry.
It's a pleasure. A number of agents on the stream. I see you, Valerie Easter, Laura Fonner, executive chef at Dooners, Dej Raj, the owner of Extreme Pizza and Fifth Street Station, Bob Shada, Charlottesville passionate lover, and Gerard Smith, an Albemarle County Board of Supervisor candidate on the stream currently. First, we will start open-ended. I follow Charlottesville closely. A lot of Charlottesville still I need to learn about. Mm-hmm. One of the realms is the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission has this stigma to it that it's such complicated jargon, that it's very difficult material to understand. The layman is often overwhelmed by the stuff that even shows up in stories in the press about the Planning Commission, and I'm speaking about myself firsthand. First, put in perspective the role of a Charlottesville Planning Commissioner.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a body of 7 members, commissioners. We're appointed by City Council. We serve 4-year terms, and then when we term out, there's, I think, a max of 2 terms. Council appoints a new one. So our role is as an advisory board. So we advise council on matters of planning, which can be anything from transportation to land use, which is like zoning, what you're allowed to do with a piece of property, and how we can plan infrastructure to have the capacity we need for growth or lack thereof.
You're a young man with a robust intellect and a deep IQ, and once you get passionate about something, I get the feeling you're like me. You lose tens of hours of your life each week when you pour yourself into something. Where I'm going with this is, how is someone as young as you trusted to be a planning commissioner in the city of Charlottesville? That's a fair question.
That's fair. Luckily, we don't have too much power. We just make recommendations that council can choose to act on or not. And the other 6 members of the commission are definitely all much more experienced than me, know a lot more about land use and planning, and I think they balance my youthful naivete. But in terms of how I got on there, that's a really good question. I've spent a lot of time thinking about land use. I'm a software developer by trade and startup founder. Every software developer, of course, knows that the natural home for our industry is in San Francisco. Now, you look at San Francisco and the Bay Area, and you see rents climbing constantly, double-digit % per year. $4,000 for like 1 bedroom in a 3-bedroom. Absolutely out of control. And in fact, that's I think the reason a lot of the tech community stays in Charlottesville, and why we have such a thriving tech community here, because there's such a disincentive to move. So I think just by being in the industry, it's something that software developers instinctively understand, that there are consequences to land use policy and that it's important. And I think in a general sense, everybody really should think that it's important, because the Planning Commission and City Council and the decisions we made together about land use policy really govern the way our lives work in a very deep way that people don't often consider. But when you look around you at buildings, at the built environment, when you walk on the street or on a sidewalk or the sidewalk doesn't exist, or you rent an apartment or you can't rent an apartment because you can't afford it, all of these things are driven by decisions that we're making in government on behalf of the city.
That was an incredibly great answer. I mean, very insightful. Blew me away with your first answer on the show. Judah, let's mark that as a sizzle reel that will turn into an approachable clip from the show. The start of Rory's answer to the finish of Rory's answer. There's a lot of people on the stream. We'll thank Laura Fonner, the chef at Dooners, Justin Behringer, Rick Cato, Carol Schwab Barnett, Anja Andalek, the owner at Fig on the UVA corner, Tyler Berry, Catch the Chef, the food cart we see at downtown all the time, Chris Jensen, the real estate agent extraordinaire. Like the stream and share the stream so it can give a positive spotlight to Charlottesville. You are passionate about this because of your ties to the tech community. You are passionate about this because you're a lover of Charlottesville. You have, you're a young man with, not necessarily the family ties to the area, so you could pick up and move as an entrepreneur to choose to live wherever you want. And with a UVA degree and your robust skill set, I would think you can get a job just about anywhere you want to. Why do you choose to stay in Charlottesville, Virginia?
Well, I really appreciate what Charlottesville's given to me. It's been a great place to start my startup, to live my first few years out of college. And I think you're right that in many ways I'm not as tied to Charlottesville as most people that participate in the process. But the fact of the matter is, most of Charlottesville, most of the people who live here are transient in that way. They go to UVA, maybe they stay here for a couple years after, they move on, or they move in, a few years after college, or a few years after graduating high school. They stay for a few years, they work for a job, and maybe they put down roots, and maybe they stay for their whole lives, maybe they stay for a decade. I've been here since 2009. And about 5 years since I graduated college, almost 6, I guess now, getting there.
It's hooking you, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's like
I
keeping
really love
you.
Charlottesville.
That's what it did to me. I went to UVA. I stayed. I realized very quickly it was going to be my home. The cosmopolitan nature, the music scene, diehard ACC sports fan, love the beer, love the wine scene. It really gives me an opportunity to do anything I want, depending on my mood for that particular day. What are some of the items that also hooked you here? Because I'm seeing the writing of potentially a long-term Charlottesville resident right here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially in the last couple of years as I've lived in the downtown mall, I've really started to appreciate what Charlottesville has to offer. I think the environment we have around here, even in terms of the built environment, right? Being able to walk around, not be threatened by cars, have a street wall of buildings and, retail establishments to go to, and, friends who live just a couple blocks away up in the apartments above the mall. It's very much a different scene from when I lived down in Fry Spring in our super cheap duplex that we rented when we were bootstrapping. Definitely fond memories of those days, but I think less of a tie to Charlottesville. But a big reason I wanted to get into these land use decisions is that I think there's a little bit of an underrepresentation of people who maybe don't have those super deep roots in Charlottesville. And there's a lot of people out there who rent or who've only lived here for a few years. And I think they either feel disenfranchised or they've never even considered that they're disenfranchised because they don't feel
know
that they have any role to play in the process.
Right.
And my opinion is that, if 15,000 of our residents are transient, even if that's true, that doesn't change the fact that we need to, plan out our city and make our decisions with those people partially in mind, as well as those who live here. Not because those who live here are any less important, but that those people exist too. And just because they're here for a couple of years doesn't mean there aren't people coming right in their place. So in fact, most people who've lived in Charlottesville, the vast, vast majority are people who've lived here only for a few years because they cycle in, they cycle out, and they have fond memories and eventually move back, or they don't.
Right, good answer right there. Let's thank Ray Cadell, real estate agent extraordinaire, for joining us. Jeremy Ronica, Tim Hegmeyer for joining us on the program. Tim Ryan, John Gilmore, Chris Turner for joining us on the program. Like the stream and share the stream. We're putting Charlottesville in a positive spotlight. The more attention we can have for Charlottesville, the best for Charlottesville. I think your perspective is needed because I look at City Council and I look at the Albemarle County Board of Supervisors and I look at some of your colleagues on the Planning Commission and I even look at the upper management within City Hall and I see family folk that are deep in their careers that have huge skin in the game here in Charlottesville, home ownership, been in here for decades. You've been here 9 years. I don't want to assume, but actually you just told us you do not own a home. You understand that disposable income, and I don't want to assume for you, may be tight at times, and working downtown and having fun downtown may be difficult because it's expensive to go out downtown. So I think your perspective is very, very needed. Put in perspective how someone of your dynamic can offer knowledge and offer a different viewpoint than perhaps is not already being offered on the commission or with council.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not only just council and the commission, but really the broader set of people who get involved in, I guess you'd call it local politics or local government, which for the most part is, nonpartisan. It's policy making. But for the most part, the people we hear even chime in, sending in a letter or coming up to speak in a public hearing, are heavily biased towards a specific set of people. And we may talk about an affordable rent crisis. We may, talk about building student housing. But if everyone at the table has never lived in student housing, hasn't rented an apartment in decades, or maybe has never rented an apartment, then I think that they don't exactly get the same sense of how it works. And not to say that I understand how anything works better than anyone else, but I do think I come from a little bit of a different perspective.
Totally do. You totally do. And this is the perspective you come from. When I was fresh out of UVA, I lived in Oxford Hills. At the corner, is it 10th and Preston? Or some, you know where I'm talking about, Oxford Hills Estate. Right across from Washington Park. Yep. From there, I'm like, all right, I need to get out of the UVA bubble, and then I moved to Belmont. And that's when I fell in love with Charlottesville again, just like you described, because then I went from the UVA bubble to the downtown mall. Yeah. And I felt like I'm growing up a little bit. But where I'm going with this is me and 3 of my buddies. There was 4 of us. We're struggling to pay our bills, but want to live downtown. We choose a home in Belmont that literally is dilapidated. The floors aren't even. One of the walls is falling down. One of my buddies had to climb a rope ladder to the attic, and his attic was a $275 a month bedroom because that's what he could afford. And then my other buddies enjoyed some savings because we had to do climbing in the rope ladder living in the attic in a 3-bedroom place. We had 4 people. Where I'm going with this is it was all we could afford to pay $300 or $325 a month, and we had no good conditions. This home was making the landlord, close to $1,400, $1,500, and this dude had a freaking waiting list of tenants that were itching to get into Belmont in this dilapidated home.
Oh, yeah.
Open-ended question here. From my perspective, clearly seems to have an affordable housing issue in Charlottesville. Councilor Heather Hill calls it an affordable housing crisis. Mayor Walker comes on the show and agrees with Councilor Hill, one of the few times she agreed with Councilor Hill on the show, said it's undoubtedly a crisis, open-ended with affordable housing, Rory.
Yeah, no doubt in my mind at all there's an affordable housing crisis, both here in Charlottesville and spreading across the country. And I think it's pretty clear why that is. It's that we've limited supply very explicitly. There are many economic studies. There's an entire field of economics, of housing economics. And to some extent, that I think is where I provide maybe a little bit of value in my perspective too. I was an econ major, so can't call myself an economist. I've just got a bachelor's, but I've certainly spent quite a bit of time reading into the literature. And there are alternative hypotheses that you might posit, that you might say the cost of construction is going up. That's true. You might say that there are a variety of other things that are making housing more expensive. But actually, when you test the data, when you do statistical analyses on it, the evidence is indisputable. It's because through our land use decisions that small bodies that no one really pays attention to, like the Planning Commission. At least, most people are not thinking about the Planning Commission day to day. But we're making decisions that are then, approved by council,
generational decisions
that have huge effects of on our lives. Exactly. And I was in the same situation as you after I graduated college. And in fact, really, the reason I stayed in Charlottesville at all, and I wouldn't have otherwise, is because when we were bootstrapping our startup, just trying to scratch it out, we worked with restaurants and we built online ordering into their websites.
Sure.
So if you've ordered from Belmont Pizza or Asian Express or Bagby's or
Shabine.
many others, Shabine, absolutely. Through their websites, you've ordered through Foodio and not known it. But back then, we searched all over Charlottesville, tried to find a cheap place to live. We found a 3-bedroom way down in Fry Spring near Food Lion on Mosley Drive. It was $10.75 a month. We split it with 4 people. And, we managed to bootstrap our startup. Nowadays, you can't find a 3-bedroom apartment for that amount. And we've seen apartments all over the city rising rapidly at rents. And the fact of the matter is more people want to move to Charlottesville. People want to move in Charlottesville because it's great. People want to move into cities generally because people don't like driving around so much.
Their time's more valuable now.
Yeah.
It's because of the ubiquitous nature of iPhones and smartphones. Everyone's so accustomed to getting things immediately. That mindset has transferred over to every aspect of our life, even driving. We're like, our time has value, so we want to live closer to the city. And you're totally right. When people want to live closer to the city, and oftentimes these are empty nesters, oftentimes these are folks from Northern Virginia and New York that saw maybe Charlottesville was the happiest place in America, and then are bringing they're bringing income that doesn't match the area income to Charlottesville and buying out the inventory. Put this in perspective and how it's causing a domino effect with things.
Absolutely. I think it's a combination of all those things. People, I think, across the income spectrum are coming here for retirement, for a happy retirement, just to buy a house so they can be near UVA football games now that we're better, maybe more so basketball. People are coming here for jobs because in some of the surrounding counties or in Southside Virginia, there are not as many opportunities available. And people are coming here because UVA is growing and because they've accepted 2,000 more people now than they did 10 years ago. And that means more people that UVA has to employ. That means more people potentially staying after they graduate UVA. And that just means more students looking for housing. And if you build more housing to fit all those people, then they will have somewhere to live, and they will not be replacing someone else who previously lived there or may have lived there instead. But the reality is that we don't.
Like the stream, share the stream, guys. Let's get some attention on this topic. Thank you, Jason Krigler, for joining us. A lot of agents on the stream right now, and the agents often say to me, April Dent Ward, thank you for joining us. The agents often said to me, Jerry, if we change, we're going to get into specifics now. One of the concerns a lot of folks have is the zoning of so much land in Charlottesville is tied to an R1 zoning. And if I'm wrong, please jump in here. 55% roughly of our land in Charlottesville is zoned R1. And my historical perspective is not as deep as yours. But from my layman's perspective, it seems like the R1 zoning was put in place decades ago to prevent white flight from the city of Charlottesville to Albemarle County. Albemarle County, and if I'm wrong, please let me know. A lot of the folks that were middle, upper class white folks were leaving the city for larger plots of lands where they could build bigger homes potentially in the county. The zoning was potentially changed to keep this from going into play. Now we're left with a supply that is so focused on single-family detached homes, it's difficult for affordable housing to be built in, the duplexes, the triplexes, the quadplexes in the area, because there's not enough land zoned to accommodate those kind of properties. I'm going to throw an open-ended statement that I just did to you. Pick it apart, sir, like Thanksgiving turkey. What's right? What's wrong, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. That's true. The vast majority of our land is zoned for single-family, whether single-family detached for the most part, and a little bit of single-family attached. I think that narrative about white flight is a little bit wrong because we actually instituted this R1 zoning back in 1929 in the wake of the City Beautiful movement, where across the country, cities like ours were instituting these zoning codes so that they can encourage or require single-family houses, detached single-family dwellings. And actually, they were pretty explicit about why they were doing it.
And why was it?
Well, a few years earlier, racially explicit zoning had been outlawed by the Supreme Court, where you used to be able to say, well, this neighborhood is only for whites. Now, it turns out you're not allowed to do that after the Supreme Court says so. But you can implement zoning for other reasons. And people were quite explicit when they were passing these policies that the goal is to keep out undesirable people and undesirable forms of living. And I think that it can be changed in a way that isn't really disruptive to people. If you're a homeowner and you own in a single-family detached dwelling, nobody is telling you that you need to tear it down and build a triplex. In fact, you're a property owner. You can do whatever you want with your property, except the things that we tell you are illegal.
Like what?
Like building a duplex.
Rory, that was funny, Rory. How about this? And we touched on this off air here. Say you're a detached homeowner. Mm-hmm. Okay. I live in the urban ring. Mm-hmm. I live in a neighborhood that is very, very popular for its single-family homes that range in price between $400,000 and $500,000. They trade very, very quickly when they go on the market. Mm-hmm. My neighbors on my particular street are even opposed to the one home that's on the street that's owned by the UVA JAG school that has students that are going to the jazz school spend a short time there and then they leave. It's part of a program that the JAG funnels the tenant to our street. And the neighbors on my street are like, he's a renter. Who's the new renter going to be? Is the renter going to take care of the property? Is the renter going to take care of the trash? Is the renter going to maintain the curb appeal so our home values maintain and increase? What are your thoughts on that perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. We hear that a lot, actually, more than you'd think. Actually, maybe not.
Well, it's because the person, that's their number one, item in their portfolio is their home. Their most valuable item in their portfolio is their home.
And look, I reject the premise that renters are bad and worthy of discrimination and the stigma. I think renters can be anyone, from me back in the day bootstrapping a startup, to me nowadays being a software developer, to a grad student doing their PhD and curing cancer, to someone investing in their family who hasn't saved the $40,000 to put a down payment on their home yet.
To four guys that are 22 that may be more interested in playing loud music and also drinking, if I'm also throwing a narrative out there.
That's true, though. I find it hard to imagine that you've never played loud music or drank at your house.
Touche, Rory.
But no, I think that if you want to hold that opinion, that's perfectly fine, and you're well within your rights as an American to do so. And if you'd like, you can try to move to a neighborhood or buy your house in a neighborhood that's surrounded by other single-family houses that everyone owns, and you can never rent out your house. And if you want, you can even buy up all the houses around you and not rent them out. But to the extent that you want to translate that into policy, into laws, and to use the arms of the government to enforce these rules, to ban people you don't like from your neighborhood, to restrict your neighbor's property so that they can't rent out their house to someone else, I think that is where you go far too far, because this is America, and in America, everyone is supposed to be equal under the law.
Great answer right there. Judah, sizzle reel. Let's turn that into a sizzle reel. That was good. And on top of that, it also kind of goes against what the country is built on, which is a country that's built on capitalism and entrepreneurs and people that are seeing opportunity and taking that opportunity and making something of it. I still would think you constantly are dealing with people trying to maintain home ownership quarters as opposed and not letting renters into these quarters, into these neighborhoods. What is the primary premise or tenets of their arguments when they're approaching commission with these ideas?
Absolutely. We hear about maintaining neighborhood character. We hear about not having renters around them. We hear renters don't care about their neighborhood. I'm sorry, but they just don't care. I personally think I kind of care about my neighborhood.
You're on the planning commission.
More time than I'd like to admit working on my neighborhood.
Right.
I think those people have maybe a short-sighted view of the world. I think they should start to embrace the potential for having new neighbors. Maybe I watched too much Mr. Rogers as a kid, but I think that neighbors are something to be embraced, to have the opportunity to meet new people, to build camaraderie of other people who live in your similar situation right on your block. to maybe even hear and make acquaintances with someone who is different from yourself.
Well, let's take a neighborhood and let's talk specifics. And Roxanne Carter Johnson, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you on the feed. Like the stream, share the stream, guys. We want to get attention on this topic. And if you have a question, please let us know. We're happy to ask the questions to the planning commissioner right next to me. Take a neighborhood like Belmont. Belmont, even when I moved in there, which was circa 2006, Belmont was so different, dude. Like Belmont in 2006, I had like the original guard, the OG on my street, where I could see guys that had been in the neighborhood for like, 3 generations. They inherited the property from their dad, who inherited from his dad, and it was passed in their family. And these were the original folks that made Belmont a very workman class neighborhood. That's safe. Belmont today is inventory that starting price is probably $500K, and $500K is not even going to get you something huge.
And for the same houses.
Yeah, for the same houses. And so the evolution of this neighborhood, I find startling, from a workman class neighborhood to now a neighborhood. I don't even think it's young professionals, because I don't know many young professionals that are starting at $500,000 homes for their first homes. I mean, this is folks that are like empty nesters. These are people that are like 40s, 50s deep in their careers here. I like for us to use Belmont as a microcosm for this discussion and its evolution from what you've seen as an expert in this field. Start open-ended first.
I think Belmont is a great example, maybe the perfect example. Belmont is a neighborhood that is gentrified in many ways, where now most people my age, very few people my age, in fact, could afford, even begin to think about affording to buying a house in Belmont. At the same time, it's a very old neighborhood where many houses were built even before that 1929 zoning code. So, I have a coworker actually who lives in an R1 zoned house in Belmont, in an apartment within the house. It's a 4-plex, where if you're walking down the street, you wouldn't even notice that it's different from any other houses until you look really closely and you find out that there's 4 mailboxes there. And there's quite a few such apartments or 4-plexes or duplexes in Belmont, and there's clearly the potential to increase the supply of housing units so you could accommodate more people. But we've really cracked down and said, no, we're not allowed to do that. And I think there's a crisis, really, like you said earlier, a generational crisis, where people are getting out of high school and getting their first jobs, or going to college and then graduating, even with prestigious degrees. A STEM degree from UVA will get you a pretty solid salary out of college. But that does not necessarily equate to being able to afford a house, because the price of housing is rising even further. And the price of school, for that matter, so you're loaded with student debt. But there's really no market fundamentals that are causing this to be true. Many people are out there who would happily build a new, larger house, or split a house into a couple apartments. You got some big houses in Belmont that could easily accommodate multiple families or multiple households. And they don't, even though they could do so profitably, because we've told them they're not allowed.
I think the Belmont neighborhood is, why I bring it up is I feel like this is the direction that, say, a neighborhood like Fifeville could potentially be heading. This is the direction like a neighborhood like Woolen Mills could potentially be heading. We've seen how Tobias's Willow Tree Apps has moved to Woolen Mills into the county, away from the city. I think we all realize that this prestigious app development firm that pays its employees well is going to create a wave of its employees trying to buy the inventory in and around its office. Definitely. So that they could walk to and from work. I mean, this is just common sense. No I question. Think if that happens, then that leaves Fifeville as where folks are going to try to go. The young professionals who want to be by downtown are going to try to go. How do we keep what happened in Belmont? And I'm not saying what happened in Belmont is bad. I think what happened in Belmont is just capitalism. How do we keep what happened in Belmont from happening in, say, a Fifeville or a Woolen Mills?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't think it is exactly capitalism.
Okay.
I mean, certainly it all plays out within the capitalist system. We have a housing market. We have buyers and sellers. where, a seller might be a homeowner or a seller might be a landlord, anyone who's providing supply to the market. And we have demand, right? People will come and move here if the prices are some level. And if they're much higher than that, some people will choose not to. Some will come anyway because, maybe they have a lot of money or don't care. Maybe they work for Willow Tree and just want to move next
close
to their
work.
house. Yep.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I certainly have. I love my 3-minute walking commute. It's pretty fantastic.
it's nice.
Yeah. And I think the fact of the matter is this happens when we have exclusionary rules, which say that you are not allowed to build housing or provide housing if you'd like to. And to the extent that we do allow it, if we start allowing it, I think it will very much stop that from happening. And, people worry about gentrification, but people worry most about a specific subset of gentrification, which is displacement, which is the person who's been in their home in Belmont for 40 years and
can't afford the
all
tax
of a sudden
assessment.
Their house is rising and rising in value, which is real money that they're getting, unless they're a renter, in which case, no, that's just the rent hiking.
Right.
But then the taxes go up and they can't afford it. They can't afford the rent or they can't afford the taxes, and then they get pushed out. And the reason that their homes are rising in price so much is because there's all this demand coming in. Demand is shifting to the right. People are moving to Charlottesville. People are having kids. People are staying here. And people are not moving out into the county or surrounding counties. People are trying to live in the city. And yet, the supply of our housing is fixed. Nationwide, we build a fraction of the new housing units per year as we did in the 50s and 60s and 70s when that dream of home ownership started. When the baby boomers were themselves getting out of college and going off to buy a house, it was much, much cheaper, even inflation adjusted, to buy a house.
Sure.
Why? Because we were building new housing units.
Sure. Adam Frazier, watching the program, he's the restaurateur behind The Local and behind Junction in Belmont. Adam also lives on Grave Street. So he has a lot of perspective as a true Belmontonian. And I watched him develop and build and improve his home on Grave Street while building his businesses. You look at Belmont today and you see a downtown in Belmont that's thriving. Moss, The Local, Tavola, Junction, Latassa, whatever the soon-to-be Latassa is, the new Latassa, they're constantly busy. And that's good, because that is driving undoubtedly the home values in Belmont. People want to be able to walk to The Local for happy hour and then walk back home without having to get in their car. Maybe they had a little too much to drink. It doesn't matter if you're walking.
Yep.
It's awesome.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a very underrated reason why people want to live in cities nowadays, is that it used to be just okay to go get drunk somewhere and drive home. Now it's not okay.
It's
not
not
my
okay.
generation.
It should not be. You're exactly right. Where I'm going with this is the downtown driving property values for Belmont. Is that not good for the long-term Belmont homeowner?
Some people certainly don't like it. Yes, you're right. People are getting hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of value in their home from this happening. In some cases, they may find it harder to find on-street parking, sorry. And I mean, some of the problem with getting value in your home, though, is that it's not necessarily easy to tap into. Where you have rising home equity, your price is going up. You could get a home equity loan in some cases, but maybe you're already overextended on credit. Maybe the rates are high right now because of the nature of the economy. It's not a fundamentally liquid source of wealth.
That's true. That's true.
And ultimately, if houses keep rising, nationwide, and you're trying to leave that as an endowment to your kid or something, then at no point do you ever really tap into that money because you want to build up as much equity as you can. Otherwise, you're leaving with your kid with a bunch of expensive mortgage debt.
So you're basically saying the concept of your home is increasing year over year and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8%. Yes, that has value to you long term, but what happens if you're need short term cash? Then that long term value is not going to come into play because it ain't liquid.
Yeah, except to the extent that we can make it liquid, and through things like home equity loans.
Yeah.
And I think those are good. Mostly it's something for the private market to consider. For the government, I think the main policy interest is for the low income and the elderly, especially, who no longer have an income, where they're watching those taxes rise. They're unable to pull this liquidity out of their house, and those taxes are displacing them.
How
and
often?
We have programs
Okay,
for
keep going.
for tax relief for the elderly and low income, where we can waive those taxes, the increase in taxes, so that you're not pushed out of your home.
How often are you hearing about the parking issues in Belmont? And it's a two-part question
that's
because
pretty much all we hear about.
Yeah, right. It's a two-part question because Core and Capshaw would like to build a mega huge apartment complex in the Belmont neighborhood.
Yeah.
And I've heard, and you're the pro, I've just heard scuttlebutt that this could add an additional 700 cars to a neighborhood that already has traffic congestion here. Talk to me about the problems you hear about living in Belmont and also how this could apply to Corin's development that he wants to bring to this neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely. And I haven't heard a ton about the development. I understand he's doing it by right, or at least submitting a by right application right now. So that won't go through our approval process because it's something he's legally allowed to do as a right of owning his property, assuming he doesn't change the plan, which might be the plan. But yeah, that's absolutely a concern we hear all the time of parking in Belmont, in the downtown area, and really kind of all over the city. And it's a valid concern in that we have kind of said that we have these on-street spaces available and that you, the homeowners around, are allowed to use them. So that kind of creates a zero-sum game where you have this endowment of wealth and you right now have it split up among each of these limited set of owners. And if new people come in and start splitting that pie, that starts taking away from you. And it creates an incentive for neighbors to oppose new people from coming in. And to some extent, that's the justification behind having our very strict parking requirements to provide on-site parking, where we're mandating you to have parking somewhere on your lot, on your site, if you're building any sort of housing. If you live a block that way in North Downtown and you're building $1 million house, a nice mansion, and you're planning on walking to work every day because you work right downtown, you might not even own a car, but we're going to require that you pave a driveway and take away some of your lawns so that you have somewhere to put your car. Ultimately, I think, part of the issue is that 50, 60 years ago, we told everyone that they could have all these things that were public property, these roads, for free. And now I think we're reaching a point in society where we're realizing that the car isn't really the be-all, end-all of the American dream.
I hate cars.
They're not that great. They're super dangerous. You can't use them when you're drunk, or you do, and you get arrested or kill someone. And you're now have this 2-ton hunk of metal that you need to move around with you and put somewhere near you every time you want to do a thing. But the beauty of Belmont, and the reason I think it's become so desirable in the last 20 years, is that it's super close to the downtown mall, which is so popular because it's a pedestrian-oriented place. And many people my age are starting to give up cars, which I think we'll find that we really need to do on a pretty massive scale if we're hoping to, abate our carbon emissions and avoid the runaway climate change that is the default path that we're on.
You're a smart guy, man. You got a lot of people on the feed. Let me thank some people. And Adam Frazier, who we're talking about, he's the guy, again, that owns the local Junction. He owned the barbecue joint right next door that's since closed. I have said on the show multiple times, and Adam, I hope you're still listening, I have said there's no one that has done more to drive property values in Belmont than Adam Frazier. That Belmontonians who are homeowners in Charlottesville can thank him for the increased property values. Perhaps they can thank him for the increased parking headaches and traffic headaches as well. Adam, I think that's fair. Adam says, I bought my house in 2002 in Belmont because it was modest in price and because it was close to the mall where I could go drink and walk home, which is exactly what you and I were saying. Linwood Shiflett, thank you for joining us. Josh the Hill Savage, thank you for joining us. Carrie, I can't say your last name, thank you for joining us. Chris Saunders, thank you for joining us. Like the stream and share the stream. We're talking Charlottesville from a positive perspective here. Let's talk about Fifeville and Woolen Mills. I can't tell you how much feedback and how much interest I have from folks about Woolen Mills and Fifeville. And what often is said to me, Rory, is this. We're petrified of maintaining the character and the authenticity of Fifeville. The residents in Fifeville, like one-time association president Herb Porter, has said that to me on a number of occasions over a beverage or two at Fuzzy's Tacos. I'm hearing that as well from the Downtown Neighborhood Association. I'm hearing that from folks that live in Woollen Mills, longtime Woollen Mills residents that are concerned that new firms like Willow Tree will cause the evolution and change of their community, much like we've seen in Belmont. What do you say to the folks that are in Fifeville and Woollen Mills about their trepidation about losing the authenticity and the credibility of their neighborhood with the UVA machine clearly trying to expand its tentacles all throughout Charlottesville city limits?
Yeah, well, for one, I'd like to see more housing near UVA in like the JPA and Rugby Road area so that they don't expand so much. I mean, I think the fact of the matter is students don't really want to be far from UVA. They don't even want to be on West Main that badly. It's just that there are no more places left closer, and we haven't let anyone build any more. In terms of preserving the character of your neighborhood, there's a lot of different things that can mean. And a lot of people mean they want to preserve the built environment, the visual, architectural character of their neighborhood. And from that sense, preserving historic buildings and general architectural style, I think is great. I think if you divide a big old house into two smaller apartments, you don't lose any of that, and I think that's great. You get to create new housing supply. You don't change a thing from anything anyone can see from outside. I think most people should be happy about that. I think to some extent people aren't really happy about that because what they really meant by preserving the character of their neighborhood is that they didn't want new people moving in, and I think that's an unfortunate opinion. I think another way that people worry about it is that they worry their neighborhood is going to get more expensive and start pricing people out and then start displacing people. And I think that is a very real problem. And I think that's a really real problem that we create ourselves because usually when we allow growth, we realize that the price of rent is going up too fast, that there aren't enough student apartments, for example. And then we say, all right, well, everyone wants to preserve their neighborhood character. Every neighborhood, they'll get mad at us if we do stuff. So where are we going to put all these new people? And we say, well, you know, who's not going to complain the most, or who's going to complain and we don't really care what they have to say. And that leads to decisions like solely upzoning a very limited area, usually an area where people in marginalized communities who don't have much say in political affairs.
For example,
West Main, right in front of Hardy Drive. I mean, you've got the 10th Page neighborhoods and Fifeville on either side of it.
Orangedale?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even just over on the Ridge Street side, a little bit closer. I mean, sometimes you can upzone places, like I think in the new comp plan, we have the scrapyard over in Belmont as a nice urban area, which is not to say that anything will ever happen there. But the hope is that if that guy wants to turn his scrapyard...
You're talking about the Harry Wright scrapyard?
Yeah.
That's a huge piece of property.
Yeah, and if he wants to turn that into a nice urban area, that would be great. We'd really appreciate it.
There are a lot of
too
folks...
often...
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Too often we upzone places that are actually full of people already, which I don't think it's bad to upzone. It's bad to upzone in a very targeted way that we have this pipeline that's very high pressure of people trying to get into places, say, you know, the UVA, and we punch a hole in it right at West Main and say, all right, you can spread out this way now. And that's why we see large towers popping up that people don't like, instead of a slow, gradual densification process in a broad-based way where there's only a little bit of disruption in any given place. And yeah, there is going to be some disruption associated with any sort of new building, but people seem to really just like, you know, 5-story buildings, or I think the flats is like 7, 8 stories. And maybe people will not be so upset about a couple duplexes or triplexes popping up on their street. Well, they will be upset, but they should probably get over it.
Good answer. You're on point right now. We filled 45 minutes. It's felt like 5 minutes here. Mike Buchensky, thank you for joining us. Brent Lillard, thank you for joining us. Like the feed, share the stream. If you have a question, comment, concern for the planning commissioner, we're happy to relay them to Rory. Christopher Eagle, thank you for joining us here on the program. He's a real estate agent. A lot of real estate agents watching here, obviously. A lot of real estate agents because they have skin in the game here with what you do. Mm-hmm. You know, let me talk about the comprehensive plan in totality. Mm-hmm. The comprehensive plan, let's start open-ended.
Yep.
Outline to people that are watching what exactly is
What is comp plan?
What is the comp plan?
Who knows?
That's fair.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So the comprehensive plan, as its name suggests, is a look at what we see the future of Charlottesville looking like and what goals we're going to set for the future. So the state mandates that we review it or rewrite it every 5 years. In theory, we've already satisfied that requirement and that we've taken a good hard look at it. But really, it hasn't been substantially updated since the '03 plan, I think. There's a couple different components of the plan. It's like 13 chapters long. So there's a chapter for each important issue. There's a transportation chapter where we talk about roads and buses and bicycles and infrastructure. There's a housing component. There's a chapter for that. There's a chapter for historic preservation, for urban design, and economic growth, a number of different chapters. And then there's the one that everyone seems to focus on, which is the land use chapter. And that consists of both a land use text, and a map, which is just sort of a general view of how we imagine land use evolving over the future in Charlottesville. In the previous comp plan, the 2013 plan, the way that works is that, or the way that looks is that areas of the city on the map are divided up into different labels. So you'll have business and technology, which will be like the Harris Street and industrial corridors. You'll have mixed use areas, like West Main was designated. You'll have I think neighborhood commercial is in the zoning map, but then you'll also have residential areas, where in the last comp plan that was defined as low density residential, anything under 15 density units per acre, and high density residential, anything above 15 units per acre, which is a pretty vague.
So vague.
Yeah, I mean, that's somewhat of the idea, is that we don't specify too much.
Because it allows you to interpret things and go into directions based on market conditions.
Exactly. And so the comp plan is the standard, once we set it, once we adopt it, it's the standard by which we set the zoning code, which is the parcel by parcel. What are you allowed to do here? Is this an R1 zone? Is this an industrial zone? Is this a highway corridor zone? Or is this West Main Street?
Totally get it. Totally get it.
And then anytime we get a request for a rezoning or a special use permit, we take a look at that map and we say, hey, does this fit with what we envisioned 5 years ago?
Totally get it. Good explanation here. So if we can get into specifics, one of the categories that you talked about in the comp plan is transportation. And this one I feel like is under spotlighted or under highlighted. And why I think it is because I think for one thing, there's too many cars on the road. Another thing is I feel like there's a way to streamline transportation in our community to emphasize bicycles and say the Lime and Bird scooters that have now proliferated the market.
Absolutely.
I like them. I feel like they offer a level of convenience that will alleviate traffic issues in Charlottesville. I want to get to all that. Here's what I really want to get to first is the allocation of parking spaces to developments. Why are parking spaces such a high priority for developments, and why shouldn't that mindset be shifted to, instead of parking spaces, why don't we save that land and allocate it to affordable housing instead? Your thoughts on that topic?
Absolutely. I'm a big supporter of that position. And that's something I've really tried to push for in this comp plan, which again is vague. It's vaguer than the zoning code, which is where we actually set those rules. But
are you getting resistance on that push?
Some resistance, yeah.
From developers?
No.
From your colleagues?
From our colleagues,
Okay.
Who I think in turn are channeling the resistance they get from the community, to whom parking is a very important issue. And we hear all the time. Probably the single most common topic that we hear about is the lack of parking, especially in Belmont.
That's
Usually
fair.
People talking about.
And down West Main, and on the corner, and the folks downtown.
And
I mean, it's
downtown.
what I
It's
hear
true.
constantly.
At the same time, to provide as much parking as everyone would like. Everyone wants free parking exactly where they want to go.
Right.
At any time, and it's always available. And that's great if you want to build, giant strip malls surrounded by huge parking lots where there, even on Black Friday, plenty of open spaces. And that's what happens when you want the market, where the market is defined as demand and supply. If you want all the demands to be met, because you want the price to be zero and you want the market to clear and for there to not be a shortage, that's what you need. You need to build more parking than anyone could ever possibly want. But actually, it turns out we live in a world with scarcity where you can't just make infinite land right outside your office, unfortunately, or you could put in parking spots. And any land you do use for a parking spot is land that can't be used for another purpose, whether that purpose is a metered parking lot, or housing, or office space, or a park, or sidewalk. And if we believe that we live in a world where maybe everyone doesn't deserve as a matter of right, as a birthright as an American, that they should have a parking spot exactly where they want to go, when they want to go there, then perhaps we shouldn't have the government specifying that everyone, even if they choose not to, even if they prefer to use that land for another purpose, must use that land for parking. And I think when you look at what people really value, when you look at their revealed preferences versus their stated preferences, right? Like the difference between taking a survey and asking someone what they want.
And what someone actually does.
And what someone does.
Yeah,
exactly.
huge difference.
And what we see is that people value places like the downtown mall and like downtown Belmont that are walkable areas. And people want to live near those areas. And people want to walk to those areas. And the more land you force to be used for parking is A, land that suddenly isn't a walkable area anymore because there isn't enough stuff there to be worth walking to.
And even most importantly, it takes away from maybe the most important item, which is the affordable housing piece.
Absolutely, yeah.
Let me throw this to you because I get this feedback, and thank you, Roger Voyense, for joining us. He's a Charlottesville icon. He's a realtor that is very big into this category. Neil Williams, thank you for joining us. Brooke Tanner, Catherine Redelman. Like the stream and share the stream. Let's get a positive spotlight on Charlottesville, on its planning, one of its planning commissioners here. Rory is kind enough to join us. The merchants that are downtown and the patrons that say go to a restaurant in Belmont. The merchants that are downtown constantly say to me, Jerry, we are struggling from a business standpoint because there's this stigma that people aren't able to readily find parking downtown. And it's up to our city council and city hall and planning commission to figure out and solve that stigma because the downtown mall and the merchants downtown are the heartbeat of Charlottesville. I hear that constantly. I'm sure you do too.
Oh, yeah.
How about the folks that say, I want to spend my disposable income at the local or at Junction Restaurant in Belmont, and I'm going to go drop $100, $150 along with 200, 250 other diners on a Friday night, 300 diners on a Friday night, and we have to park 10 blocks away and then walk to the downtown heart of Belmont.
Yep.
Those folks are helping Charlottesville from a short-term standpoint by spending their money in the community, which we then reap and sow from a tax standpoint.
Sure.
Should they not be entitled to having parking readily available? Should they not be able to get parking immediately to continue patronizing the downtown or Belmont, as opposed to Rory, where I'm going with this, to Stonefield, where there's so much freaking parking, and no one has this difficulty, and then the money goes to Albemarle County?
Yeah, well, I think the fact of the matter is a lot of people do like downtown, and it's very much a rising area. It's got very low vacancy rates. It's a desirable place to be, and so is Belmont. I think the facts bear that out, and I think if you put a whole bunch of parking in it and spread it out, you'd kind of kill it, but that's okay. We can consider that possibility anyway. I think you're right that people are definitely spending money at local businesses, and that those local businesses definitely benefit when free parking is available. And where I disagree, I think, is this idea that it's worth it for the government, us, the taxpayers, other people, to be paying for that parking for that person so that they don't, have to pay $2 to a meter? I think if it were really worthwhile for that business, if there was a positive ROI there, that business would be buying a piece of property and building a parking lot. But the fact of the matter is they're not, and what they really want is subsidized parking so that they don't have to validate in the garage.
So you're basically saying parking is not an inherent right, it's a commodity, and once we start realizing that parking is a commodity and it has tangible value, that people have to start opening their wallets to pay for parking, then we start solving the parking crisis.
I mean, yeah, I think if you want the market to clear and have a reasonable amount of parking, then charging people probably helps. But more deeply, I think you need to recognize that not only is parking a commodity, but it's something that requires trade-offs. And that if we are making it free by fiat, that means that resources aren't being put to other uses.
Good answer right there. How about the struggle or the dynamic, last question, with the Belmont neighborhood, with a guy like Corin trying to build an entire huge apartment complex with a neighborhood that seems to be at its capacity? What's the role of commission there, the planning commission there? I'm curious of your perspective as a young guy. Open-ended question.
Yeah, like I said, that's currently at least a by-right plan, so we won't have a role. But I think at a deeper level, if we believe that we've reached the limit of parking, that if we put more places, it means making other things not be here, then we need to make it plausible, like feasible, to live as someone who is walking around and not driving a car everywhere. And that means investments in transportation, in making our bus network more effective, in having headways, like a bus coming more than every 30 minutes or an hour on some routes, and actually being able to get around or using a scooter in many different ways. In fact, there are all options, and Uber, in ways other than driving a car and having to plop your car down in 330 square feet of land somewhere at your destination.
Good answer. So we had Alex Upri on the show last week, who's the president of the Forward Adelante Business Journal. It's the journal that spotlights the Latin community. And the Latin community is struggling with this from an affordable housing standpoint. And he says, from his perspective of talking with the Latin community around Charlottesville and Central Virginia, yes, we have an affordable housing crisis. We also have a public transportation crisis.
Absolutely.
And the public transportation crisis, if we had more accessible and readily available public transportation, then folks who cannot afford to live in the city of Charlottesville could live in the urban ring, Fluvanna County, Orange County, Louisa County, could hop on public transportation and get to their job in the city of Charlottesville. But right now what's happening is not only is the Latin community, perhaps some of the African American community, the white community, unable to live in the city of Charlottesville, they're being pushed to the outer counties and then are losing the savings they're getting from rent because they're hopping in their car, as you know, and spending it on gas.
Absolutely, yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so we often use this metric of 30% of your income to say if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing, then you are cost burdened. And that's where housing is unaffordable. But there's a different metric, a slightly different one, where you also incorporate the price of transportation. And I think that's really important that we do use that one because that's a very real thing. If you can walk to work and you don't need to own a car, you're saving hundreds of dollars a month on gas and car insurance and car payments that you would otherwise be spending because you're living further away. And transportation it really is in a crisis. I think that's true. CAT is seeing a spiraling downward in ridership.
That's
service
crazy.
Is degrading.
Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. I think in some ways there are alternatives that are making it easier
like
to
ride
get
share,
around,
Uber.
like an Uber, whatever. Yeah. I think in some ways there's a stigma associated with bus riding, or a lot of people I think just don't really know how to ride the bus except for the trolley. Like, how do you pay? Which I think there could be maybe some education on that front. But I think maybe a bigger issue is that we politically have just not made a big commitment about it, and that there's this threshold of population density where it's viable to run a transportation network. Not necessarily profitable, but you're recovering a significant amount from your fare box that you're making it worthwhile to run those buses, that there are actually, people in the seats. And
you're saying we're not at that threshold?
No. So that threshold usually, as a rule of thumb, is set at 15 density units per acre. And we're well below that. If you look at the comp plan, which, remember, that sets that divide at 15 density units per acre between low and high density, probably not a coincidence there. Most of the city is not in that high density metric. And I think you see by UVA, if you go look at the 9 a.m. bus,
there's a ton of people on it.
There are plenty of people on it.
Oh, this is so interesting to me. And I love how it all is all tied together. So you're saying this in a lot of ways is started with the comprehensive plan. A lot of people don't realize that the comp plan is impacting things like just participation on public transportation.
Yeah.
This is blowing my mind here. And this is like the macro side of the economics, the macro side of the analysis here. We have a reader jumping in and says, he doesn't want me to mention his name. but he is posting on a live Facebook stream here with his name on it. I'm not going to mention your name, though. He says, ask him the status of the MACA rezoning on Park Street for the retirement homes. Your thoughts on that one?
Yep. So I know that came up. That was before my time, but it came up before Planning Commission and then Council sometime in the mid-last year range. I think I actually went to that hearing. And I think they shut it down because they were worried that old folks would drive poorly and run through the light at Park Street or something, which to me seems like a very bad reason to turn down housing. But such is life in the land use world. And I personally support that project. I think, A, saving MACA is extremely important. It's an incredibly invaluable resource for our community. B, many older folks do want to move to Charlottesville and need assisted living facilities, and their intergenerational campus concept is actually pretty cool, where they're exposing these older folks who have lots of spare time on their hands to mentor kids, underprivileged youth who are there for an after-school program. And I think that sounds great. I think that's a perfect example of we use these, they're really excuses. There's going to be traffic or there's going to be parking problems. Though in this case, I don't really see how that applies.
He's giving you props. He says, very, very true, a very, very valuable group right there. Here's what I hear from my friends that are developers, okay? And for some reason, the developer moniker is stigmatized as like a horrible, horrible person. And the friends that I have that are developers aren't that way, because I wouldn't be friends with them. I'm not going to try to be friends with horrible people. Where I'm going with this is they say doing anything in the city of Charlottesville, if you're a developer, is brutal, and we're talking years of opportunity costs. We're talking about maybe, and educate the audience, one of the developers on River Road that is trying to do a storage unit complex, even through some affordable housing units in there, and he caught a hell of, no affordable housing, so affordable storage units over there. There's a developer that's looking at the Kim's Market building for potentially some affordable housing.
Drop that news on this show.
I've been waiting, and here's I'm going to tease it here. This particular guy, I'm choosing my words carefully here. This particular guy says it's a 2-year process for him to do this particular company what they want to do at the Kim's Market location. And this deal is contingent on this 2-year process getting its approval through Planning Commission, City Council, et cetera, et cetera. So in the meantime, the current owner has to find a tenant to cover the cost of maintaining the property for what could be a very arduous 2-year uphill battle for what the guy wants to do with the property. Where I'm going with this, it may not pay off. Where I'm going with this is, if it's so darn hard to get all this stuff done, isn't that a de-incentive to actually get the stuff done?
Yeah, absolutely. Last thing on MACA, it's listed as an anticipated item on future agenda. So it looks like they're coming back through the special use permit process, and we'll see them again somewhat soon. We'll see how that goes. But that's a really good point. And that's what in economics we call a regulatory tax. Is, you have regular taxes where you put a price on something and then that money goes to the government, and the government gets to use that for social services or to provide value to its citizens. And then you have a regulatory tax where it's just sort of a bunch of hoops we make someone jump through. And they need to spend a bunch of time and create a bunch of risk, uncertainty, where they might end up at the end of the process and just get rejected by council at the last second, and then have to go through a year later with an SUP.
Or just pull a Keith Woodard.
Give up.
And leave.
And this is something that the housing needs assessment figured pretty prominently, is that we're imposing all this risk, these costs of development that we're not even seeing any benefits from, because we don't get that tax as money from for the government to provide services. It gets eaten up in lawyers and consultants and the people who show up in front of us to give your presentation for you, and really doesn't provide much value to society at all. Apologies to those consultants. And often we don't get what we want out of it. And in doing so, we're limiting the supply of housing in general and causing these knock-on effects to everyone. And the prescription that the housing needs assessment gave us is that we should specify what we want from developers, and have a pre-written process where it's not a matter of negotiating on the spot or, haggling back and forth from the council dais.
I read a story in the newspaper the other day, and I think it's tied to the River Road project. You know more about this than I do, that he was submitting slides that you guys hadn't seen to the night of.
Yeah, that's
ridiculous, right?
That was the Nassau Street project down in Southeast Belmont. I'm not supposed to say the name of the neighborhood. But, So
you're saying make it more transparent, make it easier to get from point A to point B.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think we need to specify what we want in advance, whatever that may be, instead of having a process where we can kind of arbitrarily decide on the spot. Ultimately, I'd like to put myself out of business where we're not really seeing all these applications come through for special use permits because there is a process. I mean, there might be things that we need from them that normally we would haggle for, but instead we set them in advance. And they meet those things and they get approved by staff or they don't. And then they get what they want or they don't because they didn't meet our needs. We are constrained in this quite significantly actually by state law. We're a Dillon rule state, so that means we can't basically do anything unless the state explicitly authorizes us to do that. So we can't, for example, say every new building needs to have 15% affordable housing units or something like that. It's just not allowed.
And guys, we're working on Rob Bell and David Toscano, delegates, to join us on the program to talk about the Dillon Rule dynamic here in Charlottesville and their role at the state level and the impact they have in Charlottesville. How about this? And I'm going to just cut right to the chase. Mm-hmm. Keith Woodard's project.
Yeah.
Dude had $1.2 million, I'm hearing, of skin in the game, his own money, plus even more valuable, the 2 years of opportunity cost of his time and his key personnel's time of trying to do the West 2nd Street on Water Street, which was going to be the home of the Charlottesville City Market. This project fell through and crumbled. What happened here?
Yeah, and that's my backyard, actually. I live on Water Street between 1st and 2nd West. So I've got some personal interest in that project. I mean, I think what happened there is that our priorities as a city shifted. And, well, yeah, so I think there's two separate things. First off, in the case of this particular project, I think the fundamentals in many ways didn't work out, and that led to financing ultimately falling through because the requirements that we set, now remember this is a city parcel, so it's not exactly the same as a normal private parcel might be where someone's just trying to develop on their land, right? This city is devoting some of its very limited property in a very desirable location to say, we want you to give us these things and you get to build a building there. And when we first signed that contract, our goal was to have a big open market, a permanent home for the city market. And that imposed these constraints on that building where, you're building like a 10-story building, but the floor area ratio is only going to be like 4. The floor area ratio is the amount of interior space to the size of the lot. And the reason for that is that there was a giant open plaza in that lot.
And the most important aspect of the building, the storefront ground floor level of the building that's seen and patronized the most of any aspect of the building.
Yeah. So almost entirely empty, just literally empty space. Right. I guess on Saturdays it would fill up with trucks selling stuff. And that also means that all of that area for the 9 floors on top of that have no housing on them.
Right.
And so back then, I mean, it made sense. We cared a lot about the city market. That was maybe our top priority. Later, I mean, after August 12th, certainly, and when we started to maybe listen to a lot of the people who are really hurting in our community because of the lack of housing and the affordability crisis, we realized that, hang on a second, that's not exactly our priority here. And the way we went about trying to reprioritize was to exact some concessions out of him to build, I think it was, he got rejected the first time, but the end time was 16 off-site affordable units. So Harris Street, different things. He would build 16 units there, which I think turned a lot of people off because of the concept that people, living in affordable housing shouldn't be allowed to live downtown.
Right. He's essentially creating poor neighborhoods.
But in a lot of ways, to some extent, those apartments in there, if they're going to be like 4,000 square feet, 2 bedrooms, are going to be a hell of a lot more expensive than my apartment right across the street, which is a 2-bedroom that's like, I don't know,
800 square feet.
I have no idea. I should probably find out. So I think there's a few components to that. And I think maybe if we went through that again, we might imagine different priorities from the beginning might get us a different end result that we'd find much more desirable.
Does it not scare the hell out of you that a prominent developer with deep pockets is just choosing to walk away from $1 million plus in 2 years of his time? And where I'm going with this is,
think his pockets are deeper than $1 million too.
$1 million too for him is nothing for him. Right, right. But Oliver Kutner is choosing to work in Lynchburg and do stuff in Lynchburg. Now he's got a new project starting here. But Oliver has straight up told me since we've launched this show, Jerry, I don't even want to deal with the city.
Yeah, I mean, so that really gets into the broad sense. So we talked about the specific project, but in the general sense, our system is broken. And why is our system broken? Is it because we want to exact too many concessions out of people before we let them build anything? Kind of. Is it because there's not enough parking in this town? Maybe. But I think ultimately it's because there are very powerful constituencies in Charlottesville that do not want more housing.
For example?
That don't want... I mean, anyone who shows up and says, I don't want this small building on my street because I don't trust renters, and I don't want them living near me. And I think in many ways we've designed our system ever since really since the zoning code started, but then the comp plans really started with the 1947 Harlan Bartholomew plan, who's a guy who did consulting on these comp plans all around the country. You might have heard of Robert Moses. He's basically the Robert Moses for the rest of the country, including Charlottesville. He started down in St. Louis, and they were very explicit about what their goals were when they decided which areas manufacturing could go in and which areas were going to be R1 protected and which streets would be widened and which wouldn't. Well, then eventually he proposed widening Preston past 10th Street, past Madison, and the rich white folks of Rugby Hills were like, oh, whoa, no, we're not going to get two-lane road through here. But when he tried to do it through Rose Hill, between Rose Hill and 10th and Page, and tear down a bunch of buildings on the edge of the road and widen it, that was no problem for everybody. I think if I envision an ideal solution, our way out of this is we set a zoning code that specifies things that we want, and that encourages housing. And in many ways right now, to the extent that we even allow housing at all, that housing must be expensive, even if it's less profitable for the developer to build. They have to, right? Like on West 2nd, there's a limit, or really anywhere, there's a limit on density units per acre, which means that these are the number of apartments you're allowed to put in this building. But the difference between a 4,000 square foot 2-bedroom and 5 800 square feet studios, or even 1-bedrooms, pretty easily at that rate, that means that you're not allowed to put those 5 there if you're going over your limit. And I think that is a real problem, and one we're moving away from in the new comp plan. But ultimately, I think there's also a broader issue, which is what you mentioned earlier, of developers. Everyone hates developers. Yeah, that's true. And this is why I think it's because
it's the fear of the unknown.
They make excess profits. They make lots of money. Yeah. And the reason for that is because we're limiting the amount of development they're allowed to do. If you look at cartels in history or around the world, if you look at OPEC, when OPEC wants to make more profits, what does OPEC do? It tells its member countries to each produce a little bit less oil so they can jack the prices up and make more money per barrel, and that way make more money overall. And in this case, we see developers who are in this very constrained market where there's a production quota, where we limit the amount of housing we're allowed to build. And they have to face this gauntlet of the special use permit process and this uncertainty and this regulatory tax. But once they get through the other side, if they get through the other side, they get rewarded very handsomely because they now get to sell these units in a very constrained market where prices are very high. I think developers should be a little bit scared, actually, of the idea of loosening restrictions on supply. I think they'd like to see us maybe getting rid of that regulatory tax without reducing the quota, because that's how they make their profits. Once we set them loose, we want housing to be built. That is the goal if we need more housing. Once we force them to build as much as they can to compete with each other and to underprice each other, that's when their profits start disappearing. We vilify developers constantly as an excuse, as a reason to limit housing production. Because we say these developers are going to make money if we let them build all these apartments. But in reality, we're helping them because it means the ones that do get to build are reaping excess profits. And that said, again, like I said earlier, the supply in the market is not just landlords, though it is to a large extent. I mean, certainly for the rental market, but homeowners are getting those benefits too. And homeowners are reaping the benefits of that cartel. It is in their financial interest to co-opt the arms of government to limit housing supply because then the price of your house goes up. But that is not a reasonable way to run a government.
That was good, dude. Can you cut that into a sizzle reel right there? Let's start from the beginning of development all the way through that answer. That was on point. The CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of Roy Wheeler Realty Company, his name is Michael Guthrie, good friend of this program. He says, Rory, what are your thoughts about my idea of making multi-unit properties look like detached homes in neighborhoods to preserve the character? You've touched on this a little bit with Belmont.
I think that's a great idea. Like I said, I've got a friend who lives, or a coworker who lives out in Belmont, which, again, you could not tell the difference. If you look at the Charlottesville Tomorrow story on our last comp plan meeting, got another great example in that picture there of a house that you couldn't tell the difference. Let me see if I can find that and put it in the chat. But I think that's what it's going to end up looking like in R1 neighborhoods, where when we allow a single places that currently are only allowed to have a single family dwelling. When we say you can have 4 units there, we're not necessarily changing the other regulations we have on lot coverage or yard setbacks or massing of the building. We're just saying you're allowed to have more units there. So that, I think implicitly means to me, you can take the same house and you can split it right in half and you're good to go.
I think that's
great.
To me. Yeah.
And the other good thing about it is you're adding units there, and it's not those evil developers. It's the smaller scale, like general contractors,
like the average Joe,
or the average Joe who just wants to buy the house down the street and flip it or renovate it and rent it out for some excess income.
Right, the best kind right there. I want to pick up the pace and tempo. Harris, I hope you're learning. We got a new team member on the project today, Harris Tolber, right? Harris Tolber right there. And Harris, you're going to be producing the show at 3 o'clock by yourself. Little pressure on you, okay? So make sure you're watching closely. I want to pick up the pace and tempo here. You have been so kind to give us 76 minutes. I'm grateful. I'm learning from you because this is something that I know a lot of... Dude, I try to follow this closely, and I'm overwhelmed by it. And
I'm always happy to rant about land use.
Yeah, I can tell. You're passionate about it. It's contagious. It's going through with the stream here. So kind of like how you would see in like a sports center or PTI setting, pick up pace and tempo, hot topics, get your quick answer.
Yep.
Okay. Why is Riverbend Development and Core and Capshaw seem to be doing more projects in the city than others? The second part of the question is, talk to me about the public-private partnership with Crescent Halls and Corin's firm.
I'm not sure that I really see that first. There's this Belmont project that's been in the works for forever. Other than that, at least I've only been on the Planning Commission since October. I've been kind of hanging around for a year and a half. I don't really see them that often.
Okay.
I see Shimp constantly.
Okay.
But I don't know what to tell you there. And then
How about Crescent Halls?
Partnership. I think it's a great thing if it pans out, at least. I appreciate the $5 million they gave or donated to it from Dave Matthews. They're going on CBS saying they're doing the whole thing. So if they want to give us the rest of the $80 million, that would be cool. Yeah.
Does it worry you? Is it good intentions that we're coming from here? Any thoughts on that at all?
I think on the whole, the way we do affordable housing in this country is deeply flawed, especially with the LIHTC system, the low-income housing tax credit. It's very easy with the incentives we set up to spend too much money that ends up getting siphoned off in not so proper ways and don't go to the intended recipients. So I think it's very important to manage a project like that prudently, to be fiscally responsible with the taxpayers' money. I hope that Corin will be a good partner. I've never met the guy or anyone from there. That's really up to them.
That was a good, fair answer right there. How about Landmark Hotel? How many people come up to me and say, Jerry, can you use your clout or the network to do something about the Landmark Hotel?
I've got some hot takes in the Landmark Hotel.
The only thing I know to do is shame the Dewberry Capital Corporation and John Dewberry on social media. That's the only thing I'm doing.
Go leave a review on Google. That's great. Check out their new website on Google. That's fantastic. But actually, I'm of the opinion that the Dewberry Hotel isn't really that bad of a problem. And I say that, and my office window looks out directly at the Dewberry Hotel above Citizen Burger. So I'm right there staring right at it. I think it's great. First off, something people don't realize is there's enough building there that it's in the top 10 parcels in the entire downtown mall in terms of assessed value per square foot of land area. So there's actually paying like 65 grand a year in taxes to the government, which we can then use for other purposes.
Dewberry's paying 65 G's a year in taxes for that piece of that POS.
Oh yeah.
Jesus.
I mean, I definitely make a point every time it snows and they don't shovel their sidewalks, which they never do. Go on the My CVille app and take a picture and report it. That'll get some nice fines. But on the whole, I don't think it's something that we should be spending money as a government to do because A, they're paying tons of taxes anyway. B, while, you know, you might say we're going to get more in taxes if we give them these tax breaks, A, that value is coming from somewhere. All that value going into that hotel is because there's a shortage of hotels in the city where all of the other hotels are making a ton of money. And if you build the landmark, there is going to be value taken away from those other hotels who are now facing more competition. So that's not all true value. And now you're going to invite other developers to start seeking these tax credits as well. Like, I think you don't negotiate with hostage takers.
He's blowing my mind. This is a sizzle reel, Judah, waiting to happen right here. You're blowing my mind. This is the freshest take I've heard on this so far. So you're saying
I've got some pretty hot takes in the landmark.
I see that. You're saying continue as is. This guy's hemorrhaging money. Just
milk
keep
him for
taking,
$65K
just
a year.
milk him, and don't allow him to extort us.
Tarnish his name. Oh yeah, don't let him extort us.
Okay,
absolutely not.
is that what he's trying to do? Because it seems like
no question about it.
He is dubbed the emperor
and
of
there's
empty
no
lots.
reason to even believe that he would do it if we gave him the tax break. All it says is that we pull back. We don't give him the tax break if he doesn't do it, but it's still going to be financially viable or not.
Interesting.
The difference of this money is incredibly hard to quantify. There might be a point in which it's done or not. I think the negative effects of the landmark, as someone who looks at it every day, are a little bit overplayed. There's definitely a rat problem, though. I mean, I think you slap him with as many fines as you can for having a rundown building and rats running around, and yeah, you wait for him to go bankrupt.
So it's completely hogwash to say that we could eminent domain, or we could say this property is in
we got to pay $6 million.
It's such terrible condition. We could take it over with that route. That's just a pipe dream.
You still got to pay the fair market value, right? It's in the Constitution. You got to give just compensation. So that's $6 million of government money to buy a building on the mall.
And then what are we going to do with it?
Yeah, it's like there's something with like the floor heights are too low, so it has to be a hotel.
Interesting.
Can't be housing or office space.
That was good. That's a sizzle reel, Judah. Make sure that we turn that into a highlight reel. Let's talk about the Ix Art Park. Hot take for you on the Ix Art Park. It seems from the layman's perspective, downtown is migrating to Ix. It looks like the Court Square will be the bookend on one side. Ix maybe the bookend on the south side, maybe Belmont on the other side, and maybe say like somewhere in the West Main quarter, the bookend, maybe Vinegar Hill, the bookend on this side of downtown. What's happening downtown in its future, where it's going?
I think downtown is a highly desirable place that we see in the low vacancy rates for retail, for office, for housing. I think people want to be closer to downtown. Downtown is a center of Charlottesville. And I think in many ways, downtown is very limited, right? It's up till now been a fixed area. Eventually, at some point, they extended it down where Whiskey Jar is, and that wasn't part of it earlier. But like, I think when you see that vacancy rates start filling up and then prices start rising, which we are seeing, that again shows that you need more supply. To the extent that I think downtown can grow, and I think there's a lot of possibility there, I think we should have it grow. And I think in every direction.
Me too.
Northeast, I think Court Square is a pretty weak endpoint. I think it could easily get to the CFA building. And that means that you have more competition for leasing spaces to, say, retail establishments, which means that maybe we'll have less high-end boutique grocery stores that only cater to super rich tourists who then all go home at 8 p.m. and then our CVS closes at 9.
And then
which is really the whole reason I got into this planning commission thing. It's because it's ridiculous that our downtown CVS closes at 9 p.m. and like 6:30 on Sundays.
That I think is a good answer. Sizzle reel that answer right there. Downtown, what is it? 44% of the African American community said they don't feel welcome downtown. Mm-hmm. Maybe what you just outlined helps change those numbers, Rory.
Yeah, I really think that is a big part of it. Is that if you want a place to be welcoming, you need places for people to go. And honestly, I live downtown, and like 80% of the businesses down there I have zero interest in, because they're places that rely on, one person a day making some super high value purchase, and that's how they pay their rent. Or they're the landlord, and that's how they subsidize their own rent.
Right. Or it's just a hobby business for one of the people in the marriage.
Exactly. I think if you want to attract people to come here, you need to have businesses that cater to them. And then if people feel that they aren't welcome here because they don't see people like them around them, and I think that's very true and a real problem, the only way to solve it is to make it a more appealing place to be. And then I think that's a virtuous cycle to fix.
A handful more questions. I appreciate your honesty here. Charlottesville City Market, where's the future of its home?
I don't really have strong opinions on it.
No?
I mostly go to the market because I'm stumbling out of bed, hungover on a Saturday, and I need to grab some
and you need
Marie
a breakfast
Bet,
burrito.
And Marie Bet is opening that place next to Roxy Daisy, which looks like it's almost done. So within a month, I have no need for the
How about the
City Market anymore.
XR Park? I heard from my boy over at the XR Park, one of the owners over there, that they caught grief from the city for having this past weekend's winter market, and city officials literally went there the day of and said, show us your permit for having this event, and gave them SHIT for what they were doing over there, which I found ridiculous.
Didn't hear about that.
Art Park, City Market.
There's some like food regulations, right? Like you can't have dogs there because there's like food being served. I don't know if they violated those. Maybe the Department of Health is important.
Why not put it there? Why not put it there? Why not put it at the XR Park?
Yeah, I don't really have strong opinions where it should go. Why not? Wherever, really. I mean, it has a place right now that has no prospect of ever being developed, so I don't know.
You say
why
leave
it's
it where it
not
is.
staying there, but I mean, I don't know. That's not really up to whoever the hell runs that, right? Does
Okay.
the city run that?
I think that is Parks and Rec.
Okay.
Yeah, Parks and Rec. Okay, a couple more questions here. Thank you for your transparency. What's going on with the New Hill Development Corporation? Yolanda Armstrong Harrell,
Yeah.
I believe, got $500,000 allocated to this New Hill Development Corporation with a focus on the Star Hill neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the area, that's the former Vinegar Hill, right? So that is one of the great wrongs of our city, of that massive resistance era. When we took people's homes through eminent domain, we didn't give them just compensation, but the statute of limitations is long expired. And we took people's homes and we tore them down. And then we put nothing in their place, and we just did it out of spite. And the goal is to create a new vision, a positive vision for that area. And so they got $500,000 from council. I think only $300,000 of that is for this small area plan, which will cover the whole area from Preston to Maine. I think as far west as the railroad tracks and as far east as Ridge McIntyre. And really that area is this gash in the center of our city, this dead area of just giant parking lot and staples that just is emphasizing the terrible crime that was committed there. And I think if we can create a positive vision there, a vision that uplifts the black community and creates wealth, I think that is a good thing.
Good answer right there from Rory. This one from our pal Matthew Gillikin on Twitter. Matthew Gillikin, love you, homie. Check out Matthew Gilligan on Twitter if you're not following him. He's doing some big-time things. He wants to talk, and this shows you how focused this dude is. He says, Councilor Galvin expresses concern about the new comp plan leading to population growth that our water system may not be able to handle. Your thoughts on that topic?
Oh, yeah, I can talk about water all day. So I dove pretty deep into this after our first feedback session from council in December. So, yeah, that's true. We have a plan, the RWSA Community Water Supply Plan. It goes through 2060. They're planning to raise the Rag Mountain Dam and then to build a pipeline between Rag Mountain and the Ravenna Reservoir, and that way be able to flow water in between and have plenty of water. I don't know. And also close down some water we get from a different watershed out west. So the plan has baked into it these numbers, these population projection numbers that came from a company called ACOM back in like 2010, 2011. And those numbers say that the city population, the city water supply population is going to get up to 72,600 by 2060. And that includes all UVA on-ground students because they pay us for water. And then simultaneously, the Albemarle side, they're going to have 112 people in their area. And that's up from 50,000 in their area right now and 49,000 in our area now. So we're going up 22,000 and Albemarle's going up like 61,000. There's a lot of concern. I don't know if you guys have heard about Gate, but there was the whole drought last summer. There's accusations from a former RWSA guy that they're contrived, that actually the gates were leaking, and that's why the reservoir was low, and not because they're running out of water. But anyway, the point is that now the plan is to be able to meet those 2060 population numbers by 2040. So no matter what, we're well ahead in our water supply. And then the question becomes, do we actually meet those population numbers, which requires pretty significant growth? And if we don't, then we're stuck with these expensive infrastructure projects being paid for by our limited water base, because they're in the plan. We're going to do them. The timing can change to some extent. And the alternative is that we do meet those population numbers, and then we're evenly splitting the cost of that expensive infrastructure. I think it's definitely an important component to think about in shaping those plans of how we expect our population growth to be. But I don't think it's a real constraint on growth because we have the capacity there. That and a little bit more growth in the city just doesn't necessarily mean we're going over our numbers, because such a small fraction of the growth is in the city already. So if we shift a couple thousand from the county to the city because we're finally allowing more people to move here, then I think that's a win-win.
Good answer. Dude, you haven't stepped away from any question on this show.
Never.
And 90 minutes he filled. I'm grateful for his time. I want to close, and I'm going to thank the sponsors so you have an opportunity to formulate your thoughts. Anything we've missed, anything that should be covered, anything that should be out there in the news cycle, and the importance of your role, anything at all. And if you've covered everything, that's the answer as well. We'll get you to connect with that camera. As we wind down, Judah and Harris, we thank Greenberry's Coffee for being a part of this program. We also thank Scott Wagner Chiropractic and Sports Medicine, the trusted real estate firm of Roy Wheeler Realty Co for joining us. We have a gentleman talking Greene County's explosive growth from Roy Wheeler joining us tomorrow, Matthew Woodson. If you've driven through Greene County recently, dude, it's completely different than maybe what you remember years ago. It is thriving. We'll talk about Greene County growth on the I Love CVille Show tomorrow with Matthew Woodson. Let's put the spotlight, first a two-shot, then a one-shot, back on the planning commissioner that has such a nice ring to it. Rory, planning commissioner of Charlottesville. You kick some tail today, dude. I'm so grateful for you. Anything, sir, that we've missed that should be spotlighted or put in the news cycle?
Yeah, I really think the most important thing is that viewers should know that you should reach out if you care about these things, and you should care about these things because they govern everything around us and the way we live our lives. And we hear from a tiny, tiny subset of the community all the time. That survey was our most successful outreach in terms of numbers that we've done in probably forever. It reached a low single digits percentage of the city. We get a handful of emails at most a month. These policy decisions are very much made in the dark. And to the extent that you care about them, and you should, send us a quick email. Even 2 lines. Do you think housing is too expensive in the city? Do you think we should let new neighbors in? Do you think we shouldn't let neighbors in, or housing is too cheap? Reach out to us if you want. Maybe even come to a meeting. They're all public. That's how I got started in all this. Granted, it was just wandering down the street for me and pretty easy, and I had nothing better to do. But they're fun, maybe. But yeah, be involved, even just a little bit. A little bit makes a big difference.
The very good answer. Let's call that Rory closing, and then let's syndicate that. Thank you, Judah, for your hard work very much, sir. You crushed it. I am grateful for your time. I think it's one of the best interviews we've ever done, and why I think it is because you were honest and approachable. You took a topic that is unapproachable and made it seem like common man can understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate your time and the opportunity to be here. I really think none of these things are rocket science. They really get down to things we deal with and see around us every day. And if you're a resident of Charlottesville, whether you've been here 2 months or 10 years or 40 years, I think you have valuable things to say and valuable opinions about the city around us. And
he's basically saying, guys, participate.
Yeah, send us an email.
Participate. Get involved with civic duty. Ladies and gentlemen, there are 3 city council spots that are open this year. A lot of people don't even know that. Did you know that the June 11th primary for Charlottesville City Council is going to determine who wins the November election because the Charlottesville municipality is so heavily Democratic in how it votes? Where I'm going with this is all I'm trying to do with this show is to put thought leaders and influencers and people that are determining the future of our town and community in the public spotlight so we can learn from them. Get involved with the June 11th primary that's going to determine Charlottesville City Council, guys. Okay? It's hugely important. Ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow is Matthew Woodson to talk Greene County explosive growth. He specializes in the Greene County market as an agent at Roy Wheeler Realty Co. And I want to talk about how City of Charlottesville and the lack of land and the difficult nature of its developers trying to make things happen within city limits is impacting Greene County. I think it's directly impacting Greene County, and I think we need to talk about it. That's the whole concept of the program. My name is Jerry Miller. This is the I Love CVille Show. I've gained more respect today for Rory, and I already had a lot for him, the entrepreneur, coming into the program. Dude kicked some ass and took some names on this program. I want to thank Harris behind the board and Judah for making us look and sound good. Without those guys, we are nothing. We're actually going to be doing a live show with Patty Bowden, the entrepreneur, on her Animal Connection Facebook page because this show has gotten so much popularity. We now have clients asking for branded shows themselves. The entrepreneur and me is trying to figure out how to solve that conundrum. Today we start at 3 p.m. on the Animal Connection Facebook page. Thank you kindly for joining us. As always, Charlottesville, Virginia, please be good to each other. We'll see you tomorrow at 12:30 right here on this channel. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.